thanks for joining everyone that's here. I think in today's tutorial, we're going to go over how to create sort of something similar to the scene that you hopefully see on my screen at the moment. So let me know if can everyone see that? Okay. It's a thumbs up from Brongus.
I can see it. Brongus can see it.
Cool. I'll just take that as a Gucci. Okay, cool. So yeah, we're going to go through a couple of things, but we're going to talk about maybe some basic modeling techniques. So that would be how to create simple custom shapes, some of the fundamentals of modeling, anything that you want in Blender, but for now we'll just be doing simple things. So in this case, everything on the screen at the moment, it'll be this little base thing. It'll be the kind of diorama. We'll add a few things in to this diorama. These rocks and maybe some grass if we get some time. The bottle shape that surrounds him. Maybe we'll add a cork up top. Kind of just depends on how we're doing for time, really. So yeah, we're going to talk about some of the sort of fundamentals of modeling. And these fundamentals, that they kind of stay true no matter, what you're kind of building in Blender, no matter how kind of complicated it gets. We'll be talking about a few of the different base mesh objects that you can kind of add in Blender, and then you can build off of to create all your custom shapes. It won't be like an exhaustive list of everything that you can kind of do, or every of the meshes that you can add in Blender, but some of them more common ones that you'll probably use for like 80% of the time. And then we'll also look at a little bit of some basics of the modifier panel, so the panel over on the right hand side that you can kind of use to help you model an explanation maybe of meshes, of subdivision-based modeling, and a quick chat about kind of best practice and different modeling kind of workflows that you can go through. So hopefully that kind of made sense already. As usual, if you guys have any questions, just drop them in the chat as we go along, if you're following along, and I'll try and answer them. If I don't know the answer, I'll try and find it for you, and I'll reach out to you through DMs, or you can DM me about anything you want to. And I'll try and remember to call out all the shortcuts as I go along. But sometimes it's a bit tricky to sort of remember what you're doing and then also talk about it at the same time. So if I missed something and it wasn't clear, just drop a message in the chat and I'll just rewind a few steps and go back. So yeah, hopefully that kind of made sense as a broad intro of what we're going to be up to in the next sort of hour or so. I also live on a main road, so I'm sorry if you hear the police, much like last week, rolling by in East London. So yeah, hopefully that all made sense. And as usual, we're going to start with a completely blank file, or not completely blank file, but I will start with just the default scene as you open it in Blender, and then we'll go from there. And this tutorial won't be using it won't be using a T-pose, so you don't need that if you don't have it. Don't worry, we'll just be using the GLB file from the hub. So the sort of static 3D model of your beast. So new scene in Blender, and you won't be able to see this, but I'll file import, and then I'll import my GLB of my dude, wherever that is. Let me find him. Cool, so he's in there. And I'll just tidy up the outliner. So the outliner is the thing in the upper right hand corner, which is basically the list of all the things that are in your scene. It's good practice to just keep on top of this and keep it tidy, so you can kind of make better decisions as you go along. And as your scene kind of evolves in complexity, you can just keep it tidy, know where everything is, label everything up correctly, and go from there. So I'll just delete this cube. So you can do that in a number of ways, but X to delete, and then delete. So I've got my guy here. You can see when I've imported my GLB file, I've got a bunch of stuff here. It's not like it comes in one folder. So I'll just select all of those things. You can do that in a number of ways. You can select it in the viewport, or you can select it in the tree. Once I've selected it all, I'll press M to add a new collection. I'll give that collection a name, so I'll give that my character name. And that will add in everything into this one group, which is my character. I've got a few kind of erroneous bits that I'll just delete, just so I've got less in there. So cool, I've got lost. Well, I've hopefully not got lost, or hopefully I've not lost anyone just yet. But we'll add in we'll start with just something simple. So we'll add in a backdrop ramp, so a floor and then a wall that will be in the scene. We'll keep the camera and the light in this separate collection for now. So Shift A to add, and Shift A will bring up a menu. And there's a bunch of options in here, but the ones we're going to focus on today, or all of the ones that we're going to focus on today, or I think most of them, are in the mesh column. So we'll add in a plane, that will add in a floor. We can scale that using S and then drag it out, or you can scale and add numbers. So I could press scale and then 2, and it would multiply whatever the scale is by 2. But I'll just scale it using my mouse for now. So I'll scale it out to somewhere around there. So I've got a nice big floor. I will tab into edit mode. You'll know when you're in edit mode because you'll be able to see all the verts, so the vertices or vertex points, so all the dots, and your object, if you have it selected, will highlight orange. And then I'll just select this back edge and I'll make a wall that goes up, so a backdrop ramp. So I'll go into edge select mode. So you can go up here in the top left hand corner for vertex selection mode, which is the left one, edge selection mode, which is the middle one, and then face selection mode, which is the third one. Or you can press 1, 2, and 3, and that will cycle between them all. So I'll go for 2, which is edge select mode, click the back edge, I'll press E to extrude, and that will kind of bring up a plane in this wall. I'll press Z, and that will lock it in the Z axis, so it'll only go up and down. And I'll just click to do that. I'll remain in edge select mode, I'll pick this back edge, I'll press Control B, B to bevel, so that will add a chamfer, if you will, between the two, or in the corner of that, of these two planes. And then if you scroll up on your mouse wheel, you'll be able to add in a number of loop cuts that will change the smoothness of that backdrop ramp. And we don't need so many, so maybe I'll go for something around there. And I'll just press select and enter into that. So cool, I've got a bit of a scene going on already. I'll right click this to shade smooth, and that will get rid of the harsh kind of mesh division lines. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add in a bit of a base for character here, the beast to stand on. So Shift A, again, to bring up the menu. We're going to go into mesh, and we're going to go to cylinder. So it's like the 6th one down, or the 5th one down, 6th one down. And that will add in a cylinder. Now, before you click anything here, it's worthwhile just paying attention to the lower left-hand side. That will bring up a menu that you can kind of only get once, which is sort of annoying, but if you expand that menu, it sounds like the Discovery Channel. Is that a good thing, Sazzy? If you expand that menu, you get a bunch of options. So we don't need to pay too much attention to these, but the vertices one is probably the most useful. So at the moment it's set to 32. So that will make 32 straight lines in a cylinder. So the higher this number goes, the smoother the cylinder will be, but the more complex your mesh will be, and the harder it is to edit much later. So you want to try keep these numbers as low as possible for as long as possible, especially if you're into like modeling assets for games. This is super important because the higher the poly count, so the more complicated your mesh is, the larger the data, or the larger the file will be. And if you have too many of those in your scene, everything will run slowly and it'll be poorly optimized. So we want to keep it as low as possible, for as long as possible, and kind of add in a non-destructive way to that. So we're going to set this to 16 for now. It's always good to keep in divisions of 2 at least. Odd numbers can create a few problems later down the line, but if you keep it in divisions of 2 or divisions of 4, is probably more useful. This will kind of create some opportunities later and remove some headaches later, even if it doesn't seem particularly straightforward at the moment. So we'll go for 16. And there you go. So I've got 16. If I go into top view up here to the little gimbal and I press Z, you'll see it's got 16 straight sides on this cylinder. So once we've got the cylinder, we're going to turn it into more of a base that my character can stand on. So we're going to tab into edit mode, and that will naturally highlight, if you've got the object selected and you tab into edit mode, it will highlight all the faces. So it'll select the whole object for you without you having to do anything. If you click off this, obviously it will go grey, nothing selected. You can press A to select the whole thing again, and it will select all the faces involved in your mesh. So from this point on, we're going to scale it down a little bit in the Z axis. So we're going to press S to scale and Z to move it down. I'll just use my mouse here. I'll scale it down to a sort of a plinth looking size. This bit's kind of up to you as to how kind of big you want your bottle to be, how big you want the base to be, and things like that. So S to scale in the Z axis, and then S to scale, and this will scale every axis at once. But I'm not too bothered about this because I don't really mind it going underneath the floor, but I'll just scale it up to be a little bit bigger than it is at the moment. So I've got a bit more space. So cool. I've got a bit of a base going on here. And I'll go up into my outliner. I'll just organize a few things. At the moment, because I had my collection for my character selected, when I added that mesh in, it's gone into that collection. So sometimes it's quite easy to lose things that you create inside of a collection. So I've got my cylinder here. It's unnamed, unlike the rest of the stuff from the downloadable file from AKCB's hub. But I'll just drag my cylinder into the main kind of top level scene collection. So this is the sort of overall collection of the scene. And I'll just give this a name. So double click, give it a name. I'll name it ground. And then I'll just grab it and I'll just move it up a touch. So G to grab, and that will mean I can grab and move it anywhere in 3 dimensions. But G and then Z locks it in position, and I can just move it up above the floor plane by a little amount. And I'll do the same with my character. So I'll come over to my character collection, I'll right click and select objects, and this will select every object within that collection. Now you see, it's also selected the ground plane and the backdrop ramp that I've just made, and that's because this is also in that collection, which I don't really want at the moment. So I can come down, I can click it, I can find where it is, plane, I can drag it out. And now only my character is in this kind of lost collection. I'll give this plane a name as well. So backdrop ramp. So right click, select all the objects in my collection for my character. They're all selected. I'll press G and then Z and move him up. So he's on the floor there of the base. So we've sort of created our base here. It's looking pretty cylindrical. It's not looking the most cylindrical that it could be. And I guess this will be some of the focus of most of today, where we talk about sort of non-destructive ways of modeling. And non-destructive just means that any changes you make, you can kind of go back and alter the changes at any point. Destructive would mean that you bake something in a way that it's then really difficult to kind of go back and edit things in a sort of intuitive or easy manner. So we'll go over to our modifiers panel. So over here on the right hand side, amongst all of your other stuff that you may or may not be so familiar with, but the modifiers panel is the one that looks like a little spanner, or is it a wrench? Not sure. Spanner. And there'll be nothing in it. You'll see a drop-down list where it says add modifier, and you add there's a bunch of modifiers in here. So there's so many of these things, and they all do super cool things. Some kind of more complex, some kind of simple, some difficult to understand, some more straightforward to understand. But the one we're going to be using a lot today is subdivide. So subdivision surface. So it's in the second column, and it's the 5th one up from the bottom. And as soon as we add this in, you'll see something kind of weird happen, which does look a bit strange. And all that this is doing is it is taking the base mesh that you have modeled. So if I tab into edit mode, you'll see that my base mesh, which is the orange thing in this selection, is still the same. So I can delete this modifier and it will go back to the way it was. And if I add it again, it will go back to this kind of weird disc shape. And all this does, you can kind of think of subdivision as controlling the relative smoothness of an object. So at the moment, if I take this levels viewport view down to 0, you'll see that it goes back to the original base mesh. If I go up to 1, it will do this kind of weird thing. If I go up to 2, it will get a bit smoother. Up to 3, it gets even smoother still. Up to 4, it keeps going, and it can keep going up. And you don't want to set this too high. So I'll just go for 2 right now. And maybe this might be slightly easier to explain if I have copies of this object. So if I just Shift D to duplicate my object over here, Shift D again to duplicate over here. So I've got 1 subdivision on the left-hand one, I've got 2 on the middle, I've got 3 on the one on the end, and you'll see that it's getting smoother each time. So if we right-click, we shade smooth, right-click, shade smooth, right-click, shade smooth, you can see that it's getting a lot smoother over here. And if we apply all of those subdivisions, which are over here, to these models, so if I just come over here, select this thing, hit Control A, or this little drop down, and apply, you'll see that if I tab into edit mode, there's a whole bunch more mesh. And there's slightly less mesh over here, mesh over here, slightly more over here. So you can kind of see the effect of a destructive workflow. So this would be like, I've baked in that mesh and I can now no longer kind of go back. You know, once you make some edits to this and you move a few things around and your Control Z or your undo doesn't work so much, then you can never really go back from this point, or it's very difficult to. So this is why it's good to keep a low poly mesh and then build from there. So I'll just delete these. These objects. You no longer need them. So this is great. I'm going to set it to 2, which is pretty smooth. But it no longer kind of looks like a cylinder. My character's kind of floating. And this is because there's not enough information in the mesh to tell it that it should still be a cylinder. So we can do that quite easily. So the easiest way to begin to tell that this thing is a cylinder again is to add in some supporting edges or some supporting loops. So this is basically adding in more edges, more vertices to tell Blender what shape you really want this shape to be. So if I press Control R, you'll see that it will begin to give you this yellow line. This is called a loop cut. So you can add a loop cut in any direction and between any of the vertices, so between any of the edges. So you can add one vertically if you really wanted. You can add one horizontally around the connected edges. And if you press OK or click, you begin to see that it will start to add in a new edge, and that will change the shape of this thing a little bit. So if we add one all the way up here, you can see it's already feeling more cylindrical at the top face. It's a lot more smoother than it was. And if we add one again, so Control R for a loop cut, add it through the middle, bring it towards the bottom, you can see that it now looks like more of a cylinder, albeit a smoother cylinder. So this is great. We're already kind of like halfway there. Now, if we want to add some variation, so some ground variation, you know, like maybe there's a little bit of ground that's kind of higher, you know, overlaps over his boot. Maybe there's a bit of ground that's kind of lower, you know, some detail to this top face that means that we get a more interesting render. We won't be able to do this at the moment if I go into face select with 3, because I've just got one face here. So I've got one face and there's no detail on this face that enables me to push or pull the mesh up or down or create any sort of variation or undulation in the ground. And as a side thing, it's always good to try and keep meshes to be in quads. So that's groups of 4. So you see on the side here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 corners to this mesh, or this single face here, and then each of those has 4 corners. This one obviously has 16 or so corners. So this can cause you a bit of problems later down the line, although it might not be so evident as we're kind of going through right now. But we'll just delete this face. We want to give this face some more loop cups, some more information so that we can then build from it. So 3, interface select the face, X to delete, and I'll just delete the face. And you see that creates a sort of, I don't know what you'd call this, like a bucket. And this is great. We now need to add the face back in, but with more control points that we can do things with. So I'll go into edge select mode, so either up here in the middle, or I'll press 2 on my keyboard, and that will begin to select some edges. If I hold Alt and then select an edge, it will select the entire edge. So it will select the entire loop of edges that are connected to the edge that you've selected. So in this case, it doesn't matter where I select on this, on these 16 edges. I can select over here and it will select the whole thing. I can select over here, it will select the whole thing. It doesn't really matter. So once we've got those selected, we're going to go up to face up here. And we're going to go down, about halfway down, you'll see fill and you'll see grid fill. Now, if we pick grid fill, you begin to see that it adds in, unsurprisingly, a sort of grid. And the grid will be, it will work out exactly how many quads, so how many groups of 4 are needed to fill this space. So this is the best sort of topology outcome that you sort of want out of a cylinder. And it's the easiest way to kind of get proper topology onto a cylindrical face, which is maybe something that's perhaps more appropriate the further into sort of Blender everyone gets. But if we just tick that, we've now got a bunch of vertices here. So if I go into 1, select vertex mode, I can pick all these edges, and I've got a bunch more things that I can do with it. So I can press G to grab, and Z to lock it in the the Z axis, so I can move it up or down. So maybe I want the ground to go up a little bit here. Maybe I pick this over here, I press G, then Z. Maybe I want it to go down a little bit here. I want to create some variation in the ground that he's sort of standing on. So maybe I'll go back here. I can also do this with edges. So if you go into edge select mode, you can pick an edge. You can move the whole edge up using G and then Z, G, then Z. This is looking good. We've got some variation in the ground, topology's looking good, and we've kind of got our base there. And you can create whatever shape you want here. But the nice thing is, because we've done this non-destructively, so we've done this through a modifier over here on the right-hand side, so this subdivision modifier, we could roll all the way back to just the base mesh if we ever wanted to. We could make it even smoother, if I put in 3 rather than 2, if we wanted to. And we can always remove it, and we can build on top of it, and it's a non-destructive workflow. We could, if we also choose, to bake that into the viewport. So we could press Ctrl A, and you'll begin to see that it's added in a whole bunch of detail, which is great if you want to apply some displacement maps or some bump maps, whatever you might want to do. But it's kind of terrible if you ever need to change anything. It's difficult to wrestle with all these different faces and all these different points, which is why it's usually better to stay in a non-destructive workflow for as long as sort of feasibly possible, which I'll do today. So I'll just press select, and then we're good to go. This is looking good. We've got a bit of a ground going on. So next, maybe I'll add some rocks. And there are a lot of different ways that you could decide to add a rock, or some shapes that resemble rocks, abstract or literal. There are so many different ways in Blender. You can also find loads of rocks online. But if we want to create a bit of a stylized rock, there's no real right way of doing this, but this is just a way of doing it. So I'll Shift A to add in another mesh. So mesh, and then down to cube. The cube is obviously the thing that you start by default with in the Blender viewport when you create a new file, the thing that everyone sort of deletes immediately. But we've got the cube back in, and we'll G, and then we'll exit. So G and X to lock it in the X axis, and we'll just work over here for the time being, just so it's a little bit easier to see and you're not modeling on top of things. So we've got this cube, so how do we turn this into a rock? Probably the quickest way is to add a subdivision modifier and then destructively bake, so apply the subdivision modifier to the shape. Now I could come over here to the modifiers panel, go down to the little spanner, go up here into the list and find my subdivision surface again. I could totally do that. The shortcut to create subdivision modifiers is Control and then a number. So if you press Control 1, it will add a subdivision modifier 1. If you press Control 2, it will add a subdivision modifier of 2 levels, 3 for 3 levels, 4 for 4 levels, and so on and so forth. So if we go Control 2, it will add in this modifier without us really doing anything. So it's a super easy way to get to a subdivision modifier on your parts. So this might be also really useful if you have a T-pose that you've downloaded, and the T-poses are low poly, or as low poly as they can be, so there's as little detail baked into the mesh as they can be, compared to the GLB file. If I edit the GLB file, there's loads of meshes in here, there's loads of detail. You wouldn't need to add a subdivision modifier to this because it's not going to get any smoother by us doing it, or the perception of the smoothness won't really change. But in the T-pose, you might want to add a subdivision modifier over the top of the T-pose so that your arms look a little bit less blocky, or your jacket or your jumper or whatever your beast is wearing looks a little bit less faceted and looks smoother, without necessarily baking that information into the model itself. So we've kind of got this sphere over here, and it's sort of already looking a little bit rock-like. But if we just right-click, shade smooth, and we're good to go. So we've got this thing, and at the moment, if I tab into edit mode, I won't be able to do anything with it because at the moment, Blender, for the most part, thinks it's a cube. Now I can change the shape of this cube, by dragging any of the vertices around, but it doesn't offer me a huge amount of control. So this is one of those cases where it might be really useful to apply the subdivision modifier, so bake in the mesh detail to this shape. So now I've got a bunch more information that I can do stuff with. So I can select these faces, I can G to move them, I can grab them. I could select these faces over here, I can G and grab them over here. Maybe I select a few points just in case. So 1 to turn into vertices selection mode, and I G and Z them out, or G then X them out. This is already looking a bit kind of lumpier. I'll go back to face mode. I'll select a few random faces. I'll just move them out. And it's kind of looking a little bit rock-like if we ignore the stuff that's underneath the plane, but we don't worry about that. Anything that you can't see is fair game. So we've kind of got this thing. It's sort of looking a bit rock-like, but it's not looking particularly smooth. So we can, again, just add our subdivision modifier back. So Control 2 to add in subdivision modifier. And this is now non-destructive. So we can delete this. We can go back to our original kind of more blocky mesh. We can make it even smoother if we really wanted to. Just a quick note, actually, there's 2 sliders over here. So the top one will control the visible detail in your viewport. So when you're moving around the scene in Blender. And then the second one will control what it's like in the render. So if you find that your computer's a bit slow because you've got loads of subdivision modifiers or there's too much detail, you can always set your viewport to be 1, but your render to be 3, for example. And your scene will be really quick to rotate around because it only thinks that there's 1 subdivision modifier level to these things. But in the render, it will render up in a slightly a more high quality fashion. So this is particularly useful if your scene becomes really heavy and you just want to speed things up a little bit. But I'll just leave both at 2 for now, so that what is in my viewport is an accurate reflection of what will be in the render in terms of the smoothness of the meshes. So I've got this kind of rock looking thing over here. It's a bit big. So I'll scale it down using S. Scale it down a bit. And I want to move it over here. So I'll G to grab, move it over. Maybe I'll scale it down a little bit more, G and move it up. And I got some rock. I got 1 rock, but maybe I want a few more. So, I'll come into my top view with the gimbal over here, so the Z axis. And I'll just Shift D to duplicate, the rock. Maybe I want a rock over here. I'll press R to rotate and Z again, just to give it a little bit of a difference to the previous rock. Maybe I'll rotate it, down, so it gives the appearance of a different shape, even if it's not a different shaped model. So you can model one thing, one rock, but it can look like many rocks, which is particularly handy. So maybe I want one there. Maybe I want one at the front. Maybe I want a smaller one, so scale and move it up. Maybe I want some even smaller ones, so Shift D, make them even smaller. Maybe I collect all of these, move them over, scale, and I got some small rocks over here as well. Scatter them around. You want to try and make the scene look as natural as sort of possible. Groups of 3 are always particularly good visually. So I've got some rocks in the scene. It's looking okay. Now you can see as I've created all those meshes, they are all currently within the character collection. So I'll just go into this collection, just make the outliner a little bit bigger so everyone can see. I've got a bunch of cubes, so I'll select all the cubes. I'll press M to move them into a new collection, and I'll call these rocks. So that will move all of those rocks into a rocks collection. Now I can select everything in that collection if I wanted to, delete all the rocks or move all the rocks or whatever you want to do. So this is looking pretty good. Maybe I want to try and add some grass into the scene, and we can use a different mesh and some different techniques to add some grass, or some blades of grass, or some strands of grass, whatever it might be. So I will Shift A to add a mesh. I'm going to add a plane this time. So this is the first thing I added into the scene to create the floor and the backdrop ramp. I add in a plane. We'll G, then X, and we'll bring it over here, and we'll model over here for a bit, so we can kind of just see what we're doing. So we've got this plane. It's not looking particularly grass-like at the moment. Now, if we just rotate this plane, so press R to rotate, and if I press R to rotate and I press X, that will lock it in the X axis, so it will rotate around this pink line here. And I press 90, and that will put it at 90 degrees. I could press 180, that would bring it back to flat. I could press -90, and that would rotate it 90 degrees in the other direction, or 45. Any angle you want, you can set if you have R selected. So R and then 90. R and then 90. And you see I didn't lock it to the X-axis there, so it's put it at 90 degrees, but it's also kind of tilted it 10 degrees over this way. So R and then X and then 90. We'll rotate it upwards. So I got my plane. It's a bit big for a blade of grass. So I'll tab into edit mode. I'll press scale, and then I press scale in the X. And then the scale will only apply left to right in this case. So I'll just make it, I'll just bring it down so it kind of looks more like a blade of grass. And I'll G and then Z and bring it up. So I've got this grass, but it's looking a bit flat. It probably needs a bit of shape. So we can add in some loop cuts. So similar to what we did with the base, where we added in those supporting edges, that information to tell it to be more of a cylinder, we can do the exact same thing with the plane to shape it into more of a grass blade. So we can add in a loop cut, so Control R. Maybe we want to add in a couple, perhaps along the horizontal of this plane. So at the moment it's just defaulting to 1, but similar to the bevel tool, so the tool that we used to create the backdrop ramp earlier, if we move up and down in our scroll wheel, it will create more and more loop cuts as you need. Obviously we want to try and reduce the amount that we use so that it's just easier to edit our shape in general. So let's say we'll just go for 3 and click them in. So we've got some loop cuts. We've got one in the middle, we've got a couple either side of that. And let's say we want to add in some shape to this grass blade. So if we go into edge select and select this top edge and press S to scale, you can bring that down a little bit. maybe we select this middle edge and we press S to scale and bring it out a touch. And we do the same with the bottom one, bring that out a little bit, and the very bottom one, scale, S to scale, and then bring it in. So it's looking a bit more grass bladey, but it could do with maybe some curvature in another direction, something that makes it feel a little bit more natural. So we'll add in, we won't add in anything at the moment. Oh no, maybe we will. We'll add in a loop cut down the middle.
Hey Lost, what's the hotkey to add the loop cuts?
Yeah, sorry, so that's Control R. Yeah, sorry, I keep forgetting to mention that one. So Control R will add the loop cut, and you'll have to move your mouse around a little bit, and you'll quite clearly see when it's going to add in a split. So we want to add a split down the middle, and then escape. So if you add a split down the middle, it will kind of attach itself to your mouse by default. But if you just want it to go exactly where it's suggested in the original position, you can either right click or you can press escape, doesn't matter. So we'll add in a loop cut, and we'll just G and then Y, so move it back. We'll add in a little bit of a crease into this grass blade.
Do not hit Control R when you're in Discord, it makes you leave the room.
Don't do that. So we've got a leaf blade now, but we want to give it a bit of curvature. So we're going to go into face select mode. So 3, or up here to enter into face select mode. We're going to select these top faces, maybe these top 2 faces. And we're going to look from a side view. We're going to just press R, and that will start to rotate the leaf. We'll rotate the shape, rotate the meshes. So we'll press R, we'll rotate it a little bit. We'll G, just grab it over. R again. You can just do this. This is a bit subjective. You can kind of make this, however you think that grass might behave. So maybe it's here, and maybe I want to even, maybe I want to move some of these things over left to right so it's not as even. You can kind of have a bit of fun here. So let's say that looks like a bit of grass. So this is looking good. It's not looking particularly grass-like at the moment, but if we right-click and shade smooth, it looks a little bit better. And then if we go over to our modifiers panel, add a subdivision surface or Control 2 for the shortcut, it's looking even better. So it's looking even more like a blade of grass. So maybe we even want a little bit more of a crease, in the middle of this thing. So we can Alt in edge select mode, so 2, Alt, and then that will select the entire edge of this middle thing. We can press Control B to bevel it. And that will add in a couple of extra supporting loops, and the crease will be more defined, so it almost looks almost like a graded grass at the moment. So this is great. Maybe we need a bit of thickness to the grass, so we can do this non-destructively again. So we don't have to make any more changes to this mesh. We can add a modifier. We can add a solidify modifier. So modifier, solidify, it's just above subdivision surface. And modifiers stack, so the first modifier that you do will be affected by the second modifier and vice versa. So we've got a solidify modifier that's happening after the subdivision. If we move that above the subdivision, it will behave more as you would expect. So it will solidify the mesh, and then it will smooth the mesh out once it's solidified. So we'll just give this a bit more thickness, maybe we'll give it 0.02 or something along those lines. So it's got a bit of thickness in terms of grass. You can go even more stylized, you can get really chunky with it. You can also come down here to edge data in the solidify modifier itself. You can manually crease the different edges. So maybe you want one, the outer edge to be really sharp. Maybe you want the inner edge to be really soft. You can play around with this for your own sort of personal taste. So we've got a blade of grass here. But it's only one. Maybe we want a group of grass or a little clump or whatever it might be. So I'll just go into my top view here. So in my Z axis with the gimbal up here. I'll tab into edit mode. I'll press A and I'll select all of those meshes. I'll press Shift D to duplicate. And I'll just duplicate, I'll press R and Z and I'll rotate it around. G to move. You can have a bit of fun here. You don't need to copy exactly what I'm doing, but R and then G and so on and so forth to kind of get a few blades of grass all in the same object. Maybe I scale this one down with S, move it down a little bit. Maybe I scale this one up a little bit more. If you have multiple meshes in the same object, if you ever want to select, say I just want to select this small leaf right here, I could go around and go into face select mode and I could pick all these faces. But it gets a bit tiresome, if you have loads of detail on the mesh. So you can press L. L is the shortcut to just select that entire separate object or any of the faces that are connected to that object. So if I just select the thing, press L, it selects the whole thing. Maybe I just want to scale this up a little bit. G and then Z and move it up. Then if I tab back out, I've got these blades of grass and they're all connected into one object. You could have these as separate objects and group them in a collection. It's entirely up to you. But for now, I'll just move this over to my little diorama. It's a little bit big at the moment. I'll just position it, maybe where I want it. Scale it down a little bit. And I'll just rotate around so I can kind of see things a little bit better. Maybe I want to duplicate the grass, a bit like how we did with the rocks. Move it over here, scale it down, position it, rotate it around. You can have some sort of stylistic interpretation or some fun at these points. Maybe I want 3 of them. And maybe I want this one to be really small. And over here. So I've got all my grass at the moment because I've had this collection selected a bit like last time. All of the grass has kind of found its way into being created into this collection for the rocks. And it's just good practice to make sure that you separate things out. So for this instance, I'll select all 3 little grass planes over here. I'll press M, new collection, and grass. Cool, so I've got my rocks in a folder, I've got my grass in a folder, I've got my ground labeled up, my backdrop ramp. We're ready to start kind of adding the bottle now. So a little bit similar to how we built the base, we're going to start with a cylinder. So Shift A, mesh at the top here, and add in a cylinder again. And we want to use the same amount of vertices as we used for the base. This will just make everything a little bit easier later on. So we've got our cylinder here, 16 sides as we had for the base, scale it up. So we'll just scale it up to be a little bit larger than the base. So somewhere around here. And at this point, it's going to get really tricky because we can't actually see any of the stuff that's behind this mesh. So we'll just go up here to the top right-hand side where you've got your different viewport display options. Actually, while I'm here, I'll just save the file in case my Blender crashes. I usually find that Blender crashes as I move between these display options, especially if I hit wireframe mode for some reason. So I tend to avoid that button a little bit. But if we go up here and the one next to wireframe, which is the little globe with the wires, over here is the X-ray mode. So this will make it so you can see through any object into any other object. So you see it looks a bit weird because I can obviously see all the detail behind the various meshes for my character. So I can see that he currently has no underwear on here, and his legs don't go into anything, and his arms are here and it's between the sleeve and all that sort of stuff. But this is useful if we want to make the bottle, because we can now see the stuff that's within the bottle. So kind of got the cylinder to start off making my bottle. So I just tab into edit mode, G and then Z just to move it up. And we want to move it up so it's above the floor. So if I go into the very front view, above the floor slightly, and below the stuff or the base that we've put our character on. And now we want to just build the bottle out a little bit more. So there's a number of different ways of doing this. But if you're in X-ray mode, you can select anything you want. So if you select all of this, it will select everything that it can see. If you weren't in X-ray mode and I was in the front view and I tried to select all of the stuff, it will only select half of the stuff because that's only the stuff that's visible in your viewport at that moment. So X-ray mode is a really good way of selecting everything, even if you can't see it from the view that you're in. So on that note, we'll just go into edge select mode, which is the middle one up here. And we'll select all of these edges up here. We could also Alt, in edge select mode, we could also Alt and it would select all the loops. And we'll just go back to my kind of front view here. So now we've got the edge selected, just G to grab and Z to lock it in the Z axis. And we'll bring it up a little bit so it's more of a tall kind of bottle. Now we don't want a top face to this bottle, so we can delete this face. So 3 to go into face select mode, select your face, press X, delete the face. So if we went out of X-ray mode, you can see it's now a sort of empty cylinder with a base. Go back into X-ray mode and back into my front view. Now I just want a bit of shape to this bottle, so I'll select all of the edge loops up here again. And this time I'll press E. So E to extrude, and you'll see that adds in a loop cut where I pressed extrude. So E and then Z to lock it in the Z axis. Maybe I want it somewhere here. And I want this bottle to start sort of tapering. So I'll press S to scale. Use my mouse, bring it in. So S to scale. Maybe I'll G and Z and move it down a little bit. I'll press E again. That will extrude, Z to bring it up. So you can kind of see you're creating the neck of the bottle at this point. And then finally, we want a bit of a lip to the bottle. So we'll press E, and that will extrude some vertices, but we don't want to extrude them up. We want to extrude them, radially outwards. So once you press E, that will create all of the vertices that you need. You just won't be able to see them because if you exit out of the extrude, so if I E and Z, bring it up, and I press E, and then I press escape, it will have created the vertices, but they'll be overlapped exactly onto the previous vertices that you had there. So if you press S to scale, you can then see these. So S to scale, I'll bring it out, give a little bit of a lip to the bottle. I'll go out of wireframe mode so you can kind of see the shape a little bit better. So we've kind of got a bottle, and it's looking all right. And we'll right click and shade smooth and it will look a little bit better. And then we'll add a subdivision modifier, so a non-destructive way of smoothing out the shape, So Control 2 for the shortcut for that. And you see it looks a little bit worse, if anything now. And this is much like the base because we don't have enough information to tell Blender what shape we want this to actually be once it's applied the calculations to smooth it over. So we'll have to add in some supporting edges. So I'll tab back into edit mode, and similar to the base, add a loop cut, so Control R, and I'll add in some supporting edges where I feel like, the bottle kind of needs it to make a bottle shape. I mean, your bottle can be any shape. I'm just going to do the one that sort of makes sense for me. So I'll add a loop cut here. I'll add another one, maybe towards the bottom. I'll add another one, somewhere at the neck. So I've got a bit more of a crease going on here. And then lastly, I'll probably add one towards the top. So there's more of an edge at the very top of the glass. So that's looking a bit better. We've got a sort of bottle shape. If I turn on to X-ray mode, you'll be able to see that. Now we want to create a bit of thickness to this bottle. Obviously it's sort of infinitely thin at the moment. It's just a plane, so there's no thickness to it. So if we ever added a glass material to it, it's not going to look right because there's no thickness to the material. And again, we can do this non-destructively. So we can add in, similar to what we did with the grass, we can add in a solidify modifier. So add modifier, second column, above subdivision surface is solidify. And once we add that in, if we control the thickness, you'll be able to see that if I go into wireframe mode or X-ray mode, you'll be able to see me control the amount of the thickness, so the direction that it thickens in, so whether that's inwards or outwards, depending on your preference. But let's just say I want to thicken it in by somewhere like that. So we've got a bit of a kind of heavy glass bottle thickness. And that's also thickened out the very top of this bottle, so it looks even more like a bottle. And very quickly, we'll just add in a cork right to the top. So this is super simple. This is just a Shift A, add a cylinder, G then Z to move it up, scale it down so it kind of fits in your glass. Maybe we scale it in the Z axis so it's a little bit longer. Right click, shade smooth. We'll add a subdivision modifier. And we'll just create some more information similar to the base, similar to the bottle, where we add in a loop cut with Control R towards the top, probably one towards the bottom somewhere. So somewhere there. Maybe I'll select both of these at the bottom and I'll just scale them in slightly. So it's a little bit of a tapered sort of wedge to the cork. And if we really want to maintain good topology at the top here, we could delete this face here. You'll see actually, you can see a kind of star-shaped pattern where it doesn't look so smooth. And this will create some issues later down the line in terms of like materials or adding in displacements. And it's because there's so many edges or so many corners to this one flat face at the top. So we'll do what we did to the very base. We'll just delete the face, so X to delete the face, select all the edges, come up to face, down to grid fill, and because it's divisible by 4, it will perfectly add in some grids, and this will maintain good topology at the very top of your mesh. And then we'll just move that down a little bit, so it kind of looks like it's wedged in there. So great, we've sort of made our beast in a bottle, and we'll just really quickly apply some materials to this. So just a super quick basic lighting setup. I'll go into viewport shading mode, so up here in the top right, just to make this a little bit easier to see. And because I've still got my camera and my point light from when I first created the file, I can just manipulate these however I want. So maybe I want my point light to be more of an area light. So I'll come over here, select the area light. Maybe I want it to face, on the left-hand side, so I get some nice highlights and shadows down the bottle. Just G and then moving the light around, G and then R and then moving it around. Again, this bit's subjective. You can create whatever you want. And I'll just scale up the area light so it's a little bit easier to see. So S to scale. So you can see the area light. Maybe that's probably a bit big. Scale that around so you can see the thing that will be affecting the light in the scene. We'll give the bottle some glass. I'm actually going to do this in cycles. I actually have had some trouble trying to create okay looking glass in Eevee. I'm sure there's a way to do it, but I'll do this in cycles just for now. And I'll just make sure this reses up okay for everyone. And I'll just create some material. So I go down here to the material tab, add a new material, change it to, so up here, the principled BSDF, which is just the default kind of material node for Blender. And then I'll pick this one up here and I'll go to the glass BSDF. And you see that makes it translucent, and that's because the roughness value is at 0.5. So 1 being super rough, so this would be if you want like a frosted glass, 0 being entirely smooth and transparent. So I've got some good glass there, and I'll just add some basic materials, some basic colors to the rest of the stuff. So I'll pick my cork, add a material. Maybe I'll change the base color to a kind of brown. I'll actually just scale up my backdrop ramp a little bit, so it's kind of occupying the whole scene. I just want to pick my, the stuff at the bottom, the grass and the rocks, and give these a color. So at the moment, I can't select those things because the bottle is in the way. So if I click my bottle, I can temporarily hide it by pressing H. That will hide the bottle. I can pick my ground here, add a new material. Maybe I want him on some sand or something similar. So it matches the character. I'll pick my grass, add a new material again. I'm just adding colors to these materials. There's no kind of information in the material other than just a color. So I'll make that green. I want that green to be applied to all of my grass. So I can select all of my grass. So 1, 2, shift select them all, and then shift select the one that has the material applied to it last, and it will highlight orange. I can press Control L, so L to link things, Control L. It will give you a bunch of options, but you can press link materials, the 4th one down or 3rd one down on the list. And that will add the same material to all the objects, and it will share that material. So if I then change the color of that, so my grass is blue for some reason, it will change all of the objects that have that linked materials applied to it. This is super handy if your scene gets really complicated and you've got loads going on. And then finally, I'll just make a few of these rocks, maybe a different color. The default gray actually kind of looks all right, but let's say I want all my big rocks to be a certain color. I can add a material. Maybe I make them a dark gray, and I do the exact same thing. So I press all of my rocks, shift select all of my rocks, shift set the one that has the material applied to it last, which is this kind of warm one here. Control L to link the materials, and they'll all be linked, and they'll have the same material. So if I then change the material slightly, maybe I make it darker, they all move together. So then all that's left to do is maybe tidy up my scene a little bit. Maybe I'll give my backdrop ramp a little bit of a material. So I'll add a new material. Maybe I'll make it a little bit of a kind of yellow or ground related color. And then the only thing to do is to organize my scene a little bit better. So find my bottle again, enable the bottle, maybe organize and name some stuff that I've lost. So at the moment I've got my grass, my cork is somewhere. So I just select my cork. I can see that it's highlighted over here. It's in the rocks area and the cylinder here. And I've also modeled, by the looks of it, my bottle into the rocks. So I'll just control select both of these, press M to move them to a new collection, and I'll move them to bottle. So there we've got my bottle, grass, rocks, my character, got my light. Change the strength of my light to make the highlights on the bottle a little bit better. Maybe I want to make this seem a bit more dramatic, so I go into my world settings and I turn down the ambient light. So it's almost a completely dark setting apart from the light that's given off by this area light. And maybe I make the light a little bit warmer. It's a bit green. And then lastly, I'll just set up my camera. So I've still got my camera in the scene. You can see I've got it selected here. The easiest way to line up your camera is to kind of pick the view that you like in the viewport. So, let's just say that this looks pretty good. And I'll go to, make sure you have your camera selected. I'll go up here in the top left to view, down to align view, which is about halfway down. And then I'll align the active camera, so the camera that I have selected, to my view, to the view that's currently in the viewport. If you have a number pad, I don't actually have a number pad, so that's why I have to go through the menus. But if you have a number pad, apparently it's Control Alt and then number pad 0. And that will bring your camera exactly to this view, which will get it pretty close. And maybe I want this camera to be more vertical, so I'll just flip the resolution of the X and the Y. So I'll make the resolution in the X 1080, and I'll make the resolution in the Y 920. So it's already looking a bit better. If I want a bit more fine control, I can press N to bring up this menu. I can press third one down, which is view, and then this little checkbox here, which is camera to view. You'll know it's selected when you have this dotted line all the way around your camera. And now any movement you make in the viewport will make to your camera's position itself. So I can then just position the viewport wherever I want. Let's just say somewhere around here. Looks pretty good. And then make sure to take this off. And now your camera will be exactly where you position that in the scene. And you can go back to it at any time using the toggle camera view or number pad 0 if you have a number pad. So if I tick that back, you'll see it takes me back exactly to the scene that I've created. So I think that's almost exactly an hour. I know that was a bit quick at some points, but hopefully people can go back and watch the tutorial over and follow along. But yeah, if there's any questions, just shoot them into the chat. I'll try and answer them. Or just general questions, maybe not even about the tutorial, if you've got any about Blender, and I'll try and answer them. So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully it made sense. Hopefully someone's managed to follow along. And yeah, thank you for taking the time to come and chill in the Blender session.
Appreciate that, man. I tried to follow along and I got most of it, but I just didn't get the shape of the model. But that was pretty cool to follow along with, for sure.
Yeah, I'm hoping that people can create their own bottle. Maybe you put different things in the scene. Whatever you want. I'm sure Panda's going to try and do some neon lights, some crazy stuff in his bottle. If you do create, follow the tutorial. Just tag us on Twitter. It's super nice to see the different styles that people create and go from there.
I just posted mine in the chat.
That
was good up until that last step where you were shaping the top of the bottle and the cork. I got lost.
So it looks like your bottle is currently solid glass. So if you delete the top face, because you don't need it, you only need kind of a wall thickness. So if you delete the top face and then press solidify and give it a kind of notional thickness, it will solve the fact that your beast currently kind of looks like he's underwater slightly.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering why it looks like so.
Yeah, because of the refraction of the glass.
So there's two layers. So you said, what is it? Control A on all the faces?
You just want to delete the very top face of your bottle. So probably, if you're still following my screen, you just want to delete this very top face of your thing. If you have a face there. If you don't, then I'm actually not sure what your problem is.
So you're saying it's like 2 layers of glass, right?
So if hold on.
How do I select the whole exterior layer?
We can just troubleshoot this. So if I go back to my bottle, if I delete my solidify, still got my subdivision. The likelihood is that you probably have, sorry, 1 second. You probably have this filled. So if I select that and just press fill, you probably have that filled, I assume, at the top. So if I went into viewport shading mode, into the rendered mode, you'll see that it's now like a solid lump of glass, which is actually kind of cool because it gives you, the true reflection or refraction, of an object that would be like almost as if it was kind of suspended in resin. But we kind of don't want that because obviously, a bottle has like a wall thickness to it. So right at the top of your bottle, if you tab into edit mode, press 3 to select your face at the top and just delete it. So X and then delete your face. And then that will now give the bottle like a nominal sort of thickness. This will be an infinitely thin thickness, which to Blender is essentially the same as if it was solidly filled. But when you add the modifier, so underneath your subdivision modifier, if you add your solidify modifier and give it, I don't know, 0.008 of a thickness in my case, you'll see that it fixes that problem, because it now knows that there's a second surface, that there's a thickness to the glass, if that makes sense.
And then you just apply it after you do that?
You don't need to apply any of the modifiers. That's the beauty of a modifier, is that you can leave them there. That you can think of them like layers in Photoshop, if you've ever spent some time in any of those sorts of programs, where they kind of stack on each other, and you can always delete them, and you can go back to the very original thing that you started with. And that's the beauty of a sort of non-destructive workflow, is that you can kind of go back. If you applied any of these things, so if I applied my subdivision modifier and I applied my solidify, you can see that it gives me a true mesh. If I tab into edit mode, you can see it's given me the thickness, so it's built in all the walls and all the detail in there. And this would be great if you never needed to do anything to this shape ever again. Like it would be, this is kind of what you would want. But if you ever need to like change anything, like if you wanted to change, I don't know, the diameter of the bottle or the height of the bottle or anything to do with the neck, it suddenly becomes much more difficult, because you've got all this data, you've got all this information that you then have to control yourself. Whereas if you don't apply it and you remain with the modifiers, it's much easier to control fewer vertices and fewer meshes, and then build on top of it the detail in a way that means you can always go back if you ever need to. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, it did. And that did fix the issue as well.
So, yeah.
He's no longer bloated in the bottle. It's looking better over here. I see you laughing at me, Red Trius. Let's see your bottle, man. Let's see what your bottle looks like.
Yeah, we got it.
I'm curious, did anyone try to follow along, kind of do that at the same time, or is everyone watching it later? I don't know if people had a chance to do it in front of the computer. Did anyone try to do it live? Anybody that's still left here?
Yeah.
Tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean...
I'll hold you to that, Red Tree. I'm writing it down. I'm going to ask you tomorrow for it.
I want to see
what your bottle looks
see
like.
People's bottles. Get them on Twitter.
Coming after everybody. I'm taking a screenshot right now.
So, yeah.
Oh, that was awesome, man. This is one of the areas I haven't had a chance to really dive into yet, and there's just like so many cool things you can do once you start to figure out how to like actually build whatever shapes you want to.
Yeah, you can always download, loads of 3D models exist and assets exist that you can download and use and have a starting point. But it's really good to know some of the fundamentals, so that if you ever need to if you ever are kind of confused by a model that you download, or you ever want to edit the model that you download, or whatever it might be, these are the things that you sort of might need to know. It's also really good because the beasts, they have that kind of like a certain aesthetic. They have a super soft kind of, they're detailed, but they're not like overly realistic. So it's nice to be able to create things, create objects and environments that feel like they belong kind of more intuitively to the character or the beasts. So
that's what I love about you, what you've been doing. It looks like they're in the world they belong in when you look at the stuff you're doing, and that's that's really stood out. Well, to me at least, and I'm sure a lot of other people. It's just like, oh, this looks like this is where this person would be this beast would be walking around it. So I think that's really cool what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's super fun if we can get more beasts into more worlds that they feel like they're a part of. So yeah, tag us on Twitter if you do create the bottle. I'm curious to see, what things you put in the bottle. It doesn't have to be rocks and sand and grass. I've just done this because, my guy kind of fits that thing. It could be whatever you want. It could be disco lights, it could be whatever. you know, I'm curious to see if Panda can create a party in a bottle. Some pink and blue like neon lights, you know, some style points.
Yeah, this would be cool to do like a snow globe in. That's a good idea, Retrius.
Snow globe's a good shout. Yeah.
Instead of a cylinder, you just have to do the sphere, and it'd be like pretty much the same concepts.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so Retrius we're going to see his bottle tomorrow, and it's going to be a snow globe, and it's going to have Christmas trees in it. It's going to have glitter. It's going to have all the things. Yeah. Yeah. No. There we go. Red's going to come calling for you at. Come calling for you in 24 hours.
This is when people stop showing up to these sessions when we hound them to make sure they're actually using it.
This
is really fun. Yeah, definitely appreciate the time. Any last minute questions before we let Lost go here, group? Anybody in the audience here? Cool. I think we're all set. Thanks again, Lost. And I think you're uploading yours directly to YouTube, right? So I can just grab it off your channel when it's uploaded?
I'll send you the file. And you can upload if that's easier.
Cool. That works. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next week. I always forget to check who's on the calendar next. So we will have a special guest next week that I can't remember who it is.
Is it
Mimi
Sazzy?
or K.A.?
I don't want to put Sazzy.
Sazzy, are you coming back? Oh, Sazzy left. It might be Sazzy again.
I can't remember.
Yeah. We'll go with Sazzy, and then if it's not Sazzy, it'll be a surprise for everyone next week, whoever it is.
Yeah, thank you for tuning in, guys. I appreciate it a lot.
Appreciate it. Take care, everybody.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.